What happens when royalty meets reality? In a place that offers no crowns, no titles, and absolutely no scripted grace. When the cameras start rolling and the host decides that charm alone will not carry the day, something has to give. And this time it gave in spectacular fashion. She walked onto the set like she owned it, not in the casual confidence most guests carry, but with a quiet air of calculated control. Meghan Markle had not been on live television in a long while, and that morning she was the talk of every pre-show meeting in Green Room Whisper. George Stephanopoulos, a seasoned anchor with nerves of steel, had interviewed presidents, foreign dignitaries, and moguls of every stripe. But he knew this one was going to be different. From the moment the studio confirmed her appearance, producers circled the date. The segment was approved, reviewed, and scrubbed 3 times. George didn't mind a tough guest, but he did mind a dishonest one. She took her seat with a practiced smile. Her stylist had done a masterful job. She was dressed in an understated deep blue suit, her hair pulled back into a neat, poised bun. A look that screamed harmless. The opening montage rolled. Light music. Applause. The camera panned to George, seated with his signature composed expression. Joining us this morning is someone who's been at the center of conversations around family, fame, and fairness, he began, voice smooth. Please, welcome, Meghan Markle. She nodded with a polite wave, lips curved into a smile, though her eyes didn't mirror the warmth. Not really. Thank you, George, she said, her voice honeyed, every syllable deliberate. George leaned slightly forward. Meghan, let's dive in. You've recently launched a new foundation. You've spoken about healing, transformation, and reshaping the narrative. But some have argued. She raised her hand gently, interrupting with a practiced laugh. George, I knew you'd start there. He kept his face neutral. Well, it's the headline, Meghan. Is it, though? She asked, tilting her head. Or is it just the easiest angle to frame me through? George hesitated just long enough to notice her shift in posture. Defensive already. Interesting. I'm asking because many viewers want to understand your role in what's been described as strategic victimhood. Her expression flickered only for a moment. I'm here to talk about the work I'm doing now, not to rehash the same tired narratives, she replied, brushing imaginary lint from her cuff. I think we've all moved on, haven't we? George's tone cooled ever so slightly. Some would argue the public hasn't had the chance to move on because you've kept talking. New podcast, book deal, docuseries. Let me stop you there, she said, holding up her hand. When women speak, we're accused of talking too much. But when others speak over us, it's journalism. Let's be honest about the double standard. George didn't blink. The double standard exists, absolutely. But deflecting criticism by citing gender alone isn't a defense. It's a strategy. And there it was, the first real crack. Her jaw tensed. The corner of her smile twitched. So, is this what the interview is about? She asked sharply. Cornering me under the guise of fairness? George gave a half shrug. It's about clarity and context. You've made some strong statements in your public appearances, many of which remain unchallenged. Today, we're offering the space for dialogue, not monologue. There was a beat of silence. Meghan glanced at the camera, then back to George. Her voice cooled to match his clarity. George, then let's be clear. When I spoke my truth, I did it with grace. What people choose to hear or distort is beyond my control. You say truth, George said, but some facts have been disputed. For instance, You described an unnamed royal as having concerns about your child's skin tone. But when pressed for names or context, there was a refusal. Doesn't accountability go both ways? Ah, she said softly, leaning in. You want names. You want scandal. That's what sells, isn't it? What sells, George replied, is honesty and trust. If your goal is to foster healing, shouldn't transparency be part of that? Her smile disappeared altogether. I came here thinking this would be a conversation, she said low and measured, not a cross-examination. And I came here thinking this would be a genuine discussion, not a performance, he answered flatly. The tension was no longer subtext. It had entered the room like a storm, coiling in the air, snapping between words. Are you accusing me of being inauthentic? She asked, voice rising. George didn't look away. I'm asking if you're prepared to be honest with your audience, or if you're just here to control the narrative again. She sat back, arms crossed. You're upset because I won't say what. You want me to say, she shot back, but I won't play into this. You don't get to set the tone of my story, George. Not you, not your producers, not the media you've served your whole career. He tilted his head. Isn't that exactly what you've been doing? Setting the tone for your own story while silencing anyone who disagrees with the way you tell it? For the first time, Meghan's voice dropped its velvet edge. I think we're done here, she said, looking off camera. Walking away is easy, George said, unmoved. But conversations only get hard when the truth starts to surface. Her chair scraped lightly as she stood. There was a silence that felt like a held breath. One of the producers off camera whispered something, but Meghan didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she leaned slightly toward George, just enough for the microphone to still pick it up. You think you're the truth teller here? She hissed. You've made a career out of sanitized scripts. Don't mistake control for courage. Then, with one final glance at the camera, she turned and walked off set. George remained seated, unmoving, and the silence that followed was louder than anything she had said. The studio didn't breathe. Not the camera operators, not the producers in the control room, not even the audience watching the monitor wall. Meghan Markle had just stormed off live television, and for 3 full seconds, the air sat heavy with disbelief. But George Stephanopoulos, ever composed, adjusted the button on his jacket and looked straight into camera 1. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on his face said it all. A crew member whispered in his ear, asking if they should cut to commercial. George didn't flinch. Not yet, he said under his breath, gaze still locked forward. Then the silence cracked. A voice echoed from just off stage. Meghan had stopped walking. The cameras weren't pointed at her anymore, but the audio feed was still hot, and her voice's sharp slice cut through the set. You knew exactly what you were doing bringing me here, she called out loud enough for the microphones to catch every word. This wasn't a conversation. This was a setup. George turned, slightly, still seated, his voice calm but carrying. No, Meghan. A setup is when you know the outcome before you've heard the questions. That's not what happened here. She stepped partially back into view, just at the edge of the frame. Her expression had changed. Gone was the media-trained smile. In its place, raw frustration. Don't pretend you're some impartial referee, she said, crossing her arms. You've built your career off access. Now you bite the hand that fed you the headlines. George leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow lifting. Access isn't the same as accountability. You sat here on national television and refused to answer a single direct question. Not about your claims, not about your contradictions, and when pressed, you left. "Because I will not let you put me on trial for choosing to speak out," she snapped. "I lived what I lived, and I won't let your beliefs dictate how I tell that story." He stood now slowly, not to chase or argue, but to meet her where she stood. The distance between them, a handful of feet, suddenly felt charged. "This isn't about policing your story," George said. "It's about truth. It's about whether your version of events holds up when people ask hard questions. If your story can't withstand that, maybe it isn't as solid as you think." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You want truth? Fine. You want me to name names? To burn bridges? To feed the fire for your ratings? I came here trying to take the high road, but maybe you only recognize authenticity when it bleeds." His reply came quick, but not raised. Controlled, deliberate. "High roads don't come with a camera crew and a press release." Meghan took a step closer. "Careful, George. You're starting to sound like the tabloids you claim to be above." "And you," he replied, "are starting to sound like someone who mistakes criticism for cruelty." The tension between them was no longer performative. This was not a debate. This was a duel, and though no one interrupted, everyone was locked in place. One of the producers finally cracked the silence behind the scenes. "We need to cut. We're live." George held up a finger, not turning away. "Not yet." Meghan's voice dropped just enough to shift the moment. She was no longer shouting. She was daring. "You think I'm afraid of this," she said. "Of you? You're just another man in a suit who thinks he can hold me to a standard no one else lives up to. And you're just another public figure who thinks being questioned is the same as being attacked," George shot back. "Do you know how many guests I've had in that chair who took tougher questions and stayed? They didn't flinch. They didn't fold." Her eyes narrowed. "So, I flinched. You fled." They stood there, suspended. No one moved. No one dared. It was Meghan who finally broke the moment, exhaling sharply. "You came into this with your mind made up," she said. "You're not interested in hearing me. You're interested in breaking me." "No," George said quietly. "I was interested in seeing if the version of you people keep hearing actually exists." She didn't answer, not with words, but the way she looked at him, disbelief, offense, and something else buried beneath it, spoke volumes. At that moment, a junior producer approached cautiously, head set askew, clearly rattled. "Should we cut to weather?" George didn't answer right away. He looked at Meghan, at the thin veil of control she still held together, and then finally back to the producer. "No," he said. "Let's finish what we started." He gestured to the seat. There was a pause, a visible calculation behind her eyes, a flicker of defiance. She stepped forward again slowly and eased herself back into the chair. But she didn't smile. She didn't pose. And as she leaned into the mic, she said in a low, pointed voice, "Ask your next question." And George, finally sitting as well, opened his notebook to the next tab, but his eyes never left hers. George didn't rush. He turned the page in his notebook slowly, deliberately, letting the silence sit just long enough to feel intentional. Meghan sat rigid, one hand gripping the arm of the chair, the other resting on her knee. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were locked on him. "No more dancing around it," she said flatly. "If you have something to say it." George looked up. "You've often spoken about being silenced," he began, voice even, "and yet you've had more platforms than almost anyone else in the last 5 years. That's not an attack, that's a fact. So let me ask plainly, how does someone silenced also become the most amplified voice in every room?" Meghan's lips parted just barely, then pressed together again. "You don't understand what being silenced means," she said, tone low but deliberate. "It's not about airtime. It's about what you're allowed to say without consequence." He leaned forward. "Is it really consequence if the people challenging you are just asking for clarification? Or is it just discomfort when you're not in control of the edit?" "You say that like I haven't paid a price," she shot back. "Like there hasn't been a cost to every word I've ever said publicly." George didn't back down. "There is always a cost to influence. But the question is, did you earn it by telling the truth, or by mastering the art of framing it?" Her voice sharpened. "And who decides that? You?" "No," he said quietly. "But the public does. And they're still waiting for answers." She stared at him. The studio lights caught just enough tension in her jaw to suggest restraint. "You're trying to make this about my credibility," she said. "You're picking apart my every word. Would you do this if I were someone else? Someone safer?" He answered instantly. "I've done it with senators. I've done it with CEOs. I've done it with friends. The only thing I don't do is play favorites." Her gaze didn't soften. "You've read the headlines. You know what happens when I speak plainly. The spin, the mockery. You want me to be vulnerable, in front of cameras, while you sit there dissecting my humanity like a court transcript." George shook his head slowly. "No, I want you to be accountable. And those aren't the same thing." There was a long pause. Her eyes moved slightly, scanning his face for signs of weakness, for cracks in his stance. But there weren't any. She sighed, not out of defeat, but out of frustration. "Fine," she said. "You want clarity? I'll give it to you." She leaned in. "Yes, there were conversations about my child's skin tone. No, I won't name who said it, because the point was never about one person. It was about the environment, about the silence that followed, the institution that treated me like a threat for merely existing." George nodded slowly. "You realize that without specifics, people question whether the story holds weight. Vague accusations invite skepticism. And specifics," she said coldly, "invite danger. For me, for my children." His voice lowered. "So the solution is implication without evidence?" She flinched just slightly, then recovered. "You're trying to corner me into saying something that fits your format," she said. "But life doesn't work like a legal deposition." "No," he agreed. "But the truth still works like the truth. And right now, you're asking for belief, without scrutiny." She exhaled sharply. "I didn't ask to be believed. I asked to be heard." George tilted his head. "But if people hear you and then question what they heard, are they wrong? Or are they just thinking critically?" A long silence followed. Meghan finally said, "You're not interested in my experience. You're interested in tearing it apart. Until there's nothing left to believe in." George folded his hands. "I'm interested in whether what you call your experience also lines up with facts, because stories matter. But truth matters more." Her eyes didn't leave his. "Maybe your problem, George, is that you still think facts and truth are the same thing." He paused, visibly considering her words. "Tell me what that means," he said. She hesitated. "Facts are data points. Truth is what you live. It's the weight behind your choices. The way a room changes when you walk in, the tone in someone's voice when they say one thing but mean another. You want names and timelines, but the story is bigger than that. It's about patterns, power, silence. That's the truth I lived. George nodded slowly. That may be your truth, but that doesn't make it the truth. Meghan's eyes narrowed. And that distinction? That's exactly what people like you use to discredit voices like mine. He leaned forward. No, that's what people like me use to separate storytelling from journalism. There was a moment then, a shift. Her armor cracked, not completely, but enough to see something behind it. Tiredness, maybe, or defiance running out of fuel. I came here thinking you might understand, she said, that maybe someone with your background would get it. George's voice softened slightly. And I thought you'd be willing to do more than repeat the same rehearsed grievances. She flinched again, but didn't look away. Rehearsed, she repeated. You think this is performance? I think it's strategy, George said. And strategy isn't inherently dishonest, but it's not the same as truth. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The pause hung in the air, the tension quiet but palpable. The control room still hadn't cut away. No one dared. George finally reached for his water, took a measured sip, then looked up. We can stop here, he offered, voice even. Meghan shook her head slowly. No, she said. You wanted the real version of me, so let's keep going. The set was quiet, but nothing about the moment felt still. George leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on the desk, his voice low. You said you wanted to keep going, so let's talk about control. Meghan tilted her head, curious but guarded. Control? You said that the media tried to control your image, that the institution tried to control your voice, George said. But from the outside, it looks like you've tried to control every room you walk into. The script, the tone, the questions, even now. She laughed quietly. Is that a crime? A woman wanting control over her own story? It's not a crime, he said. But when you demand control and accountability from others, you have to accept the same for yourself. That's where it stops feeling like a conversation and starts feeling like a monologue. She crossed her legs slowly, deliberately. George. What? You call control, I call survival. I didn't have the luxury of walking into rooms and just being. Every word I say is dissected. Every gesture turned into a headline. So, yes, I managed the message. But that's not manipulation. That's necessity. He nodded slowly, almost as if conceding. The point, but not fully. You're right, he said. But sometimes managing the message means the message loses its meaning. You want people to see you as vulnerable, as honest. But every word feels polished, protected, rehearsed. Her tone cooled. Would you prefer I cry on command? That I unravel for your audience so you can say you got the real me? No, he said firmly. I'd prefer answers that don't come with qualifiers. Truth that doesn't flinch when pressed. Her smile was gone now, replaced with something sharper. The truth, George, is that you don't want me to be honest. You want me to confess. You want me to surrender. I want clarity, he said, and I want accountability. You have influence, massive influence, and when someone wields that much power through personal narrative, they don't just shape perception, they shape consequences. Meghan's eyes narrowed. You think I'm responsible for people's reactions to my story? I think, George said, voice unwavering. You're responsible for what you choose to leave out of it. A long silence followed, her jaw clenched. The silence was weighty, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. You know, she finally said, I used to admire you. Thought you were one of the good ones. "I'm not here to be admired," he said. "I'm here to ask the questions no one else will." "And if I don't answer them the way you want?" she asked. "I'm evasive, dishonest." "No," he said. "But if you dodge every uncomfortable truth, you can't expect people to treat you like a credible voice." That one landed. She blinked, looked away for the first time since she sat back down. He didn't press. She exhaled slow. "I came here to talk. About healing, about the work I'm doing now. You dragged me back into the muck." George's voice was steady. "Healing doesn't come without truth, and truth doesn't come without confrontation." She met his eyes again. "You keep saying truth like it's some absolute thing, but all you've done is challenge my version without ever considering the weight of what I lived." "I've considered it," George said. "And I've also considered the other voices that haven't had the platform you do. The people you've described, criticized, without giving them a chance to respond." "I didn't name anyone," she said quickly. "But you implied everyone," he answered. "You built a castle out of shadows and let the public fill in the rest." Another silence. And this time, when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Not defeated. Just stripped bare. "Maybe I did that because I didn't think anyone would listen if I told the full story. Maybe I thought they'd twist it anyway." He nodded. "And maybe that's fair. But when you speak in half-truths, don't be surprised when people come looking for the rest." She paused, looked down at her hands, then back up. "You've got your moment," she said. "You dragged me into a fight I didn't want. But you don't get to call this a victory." "This isn't a victory," George said, rising to his feet. "It's a reckoning. And those don't belong to the person asking the questions. They belong to the person who walks out of here and decides what to do next." She stood too, slowly smoothed her jacket. Her eyes were still. "I'm not broken, George, and I'm not walking away ashamed. If anything, you've just reminded me why I stopped trusting interviews like this. And I'm not walking away apologizing," he replied, "because this wasn't an ambush. This was a mirror." They stood in silence for a moment, neither blinking, neither giving the last word. But it was George who turned back to the camera. Not smug, not victorious, just unshaken. And Meghan walked off the set for the second time. But this time, she didn't look back. The camera lingered. The tension hadn't vanished. It had only gone quiet. And that was the moment the broadcast cut to commercial. But you watching now have seen what few do. Not the performance, not the press release, but the unvarnished collision between image and inquiry, between control and confrontation. What do you think? Was Meghan Markle challenged unfairly, or finally asked what no one else dared to? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe if you want more stories that go deeper than the headlines.